Hi, my name is Jen. One day, I was sitting quietly in class, listening to our boring teacher ramble on and on. Miss Silva was always super strict with us, and she loved to brag about how only she understood the hard realities of life, since she had once been homeless for a whole 2 hours. When we were assigned projects, and she refused to let me do my chosen project, which was homelessness, she went too far. My dream in life was to become a social worker and help people living on the streets. Miss Silva wouldn't budge though, and she mocked me saying, "Jen, with your cushy life, you can't possibly have the perspective to understand this topic." How dare she? Everyone in my class laughed. I had been known as a spoiled girl throughout high school because we were well off, and my classmates must have agreed with her. I complained about it to my friend Carol, who agreed that Miss Silva was mean and out of line. But then she said, "Yeah, but it was pretty funny too. I mean, you are very spoiled, and you wouldn't survive half a day on the streets." I replied, "Seriously, Carol? I might look spoiled to you, but I'm not. I could make it as a homeless person for a week, if not more." Carol laughed and said, "Sure you can, princess. If you're so confident, why not try it out? In fact, I dare you." You know what? I will do it. I'm not afraid to try. You challenged the wrong girl. Dare accepted. After that, Carol and I decided that she would film my journey of being homeless for a whole week. I was actually seriously scared about the idea. What was I thinking? A whole week! I might die from hunger, or get eaten by a predator, or get sick and die of hypothermia. But something in me wanted to go through with the dare. I wasn't gonna give up. My mom, of course, hated the idea. She even threatened to ground me to make sure I couldn't do it. She warned me that life on the streets was dangerous, especially at night. But I wasn't going to go crawling back to Carol and tell her that my mommy wouldn't allow it. I was going to do it with or without my mother's approval. My plan was that on the days when I was supposed to be at school, I would claim that I was sick. Instead, I would sit on Main Street in dirty clothes to blend in with other homeless people. But every night, I would go home and sleep in my own bed. On an early Monday morning, before school, Carol and I started packing my bag with stuff from my locker and home. I had brought way too much stuff from home, but I wanted to be on the safe side. When we were about to leave, Carol had one more dare. She wanted me to set up in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. At first, I refused, as I could end up in real danger. But Carol refused to negotiate. Instead, we made a deal that I could call 911 if anything were to happen. I began to feel weird about the whole thing. Some people were giving me wary looks, though most just pretended I wasn't there. The neighborhood looked pretty scary. It took a long time to decide where to set up. There was an empty convenience store that had gone out of business, so I decided to settle down in the doorway. I sat down and placed my Nike hat on the ground. Carol offered some last-minute cookies, but I refused as I wanted this to be as genuine as possible. Homeless people find their own food. Carol filmed me for a brief time and said, "This is Jen on her first day as a homeless person. Good luck!" And then she went home. Sitting in the doorway made me sore fast. I ended up leaning on the newspaper-covered door. I felt so nervous. How did homeless people do this? I tried to pass the time by daydreaming about me and my crush from school, Aaron, but that only lasted a few minutes. Finally, someone dropped a few coins in my cap. I smiled and said thank you. The soreness started to become too much. Time for a stretch, I thought, getting to my feet. The minute I stood up, though, a mangy-looking, middle-aged man with a long, scraggly beard and black, glittering eyes confronted me. "That's my spot," he growled at me. For a split second, his tall, looming figure unnerved me, and I got ready to run away. The next moment, however, a voice in my head spoke up. "If you don't stand up to the likes of him now, the whole week will be your personal hell." The thought charged me, and I dug my heels in. "Beat it, old man. I was here first." I tried to imitate his way of speaking. His frown deepened, and he raised his hand. With a flash, I swung my backpack off my shoulder and straight into his stomach. "Ah!" He groaned, doubling over. In my heart, I congratulated myself, thinking I'd won. The next minute, however, the man looked over his shoulder and yelled, "Get her, boys!" That's when I saw two equally mangy-looking boys emerge from the shadows. They both grinned evilly as they stepped towards me. Before they took another step, I threw the cap with the coins in the man's face, which caught him off guard and gave me time to turn on my heels and run. Behind me, I could hear him yelling at the boys to get to me faster. People around us were starting to stop and stare. I didn't have time to ask them to intervene. I pushed past everyone, heading towards the busy roads. I had a good head start, so I was hopeful I could get away from them. I realized, though, that they were hot on my heels, and as I passed a grocery store, I bumped into a woman with a trolley. "Damn!" I cursed as her stuff went flying. "I'm so I stopped as I saw the woman was none other than Miss Silva. "Jen?" she gasped, shocked. Before I could run away, she grabbed me by the arm. The boys had almost caught up to me now. When they saw me with Miss Silva, they assumed I'd gotten into trouble. Giving me one last look of anger, they turned around and went back the way they had came. I, however, was stuck with Miss Silva, whose shock was being slowly replaced with rage. What in the world are you doing? She asked sharply. I briefly explained to her the bet her insult had led to. She looked ashamed. I'm sorry, Jen. This isn't what I wanted you to do. I gave her a quick hug and made her promise she wouldn't tell anyone. To my surprise, seeing how determined I was to get through this, she agreed. Then she asked me where I would be and promised to come check on me every day. Realizing she wasn't as bad as I thought she was, I returned to look for another spot around the same area. The next few days passed without any more fights, and I quickly learned about life as a homeless person. It's true that I still slept in my house as soon as it got dark, but during the daylight hours, I was struggling to survive. Carol came every morning at 6 a.m. to make sure I was still there. She'd make fun of me every time about the way I looked. I wasn't taking care of my skin and I started getting pimples. My hair looked bad, and I'd really started to smell. I got used to it pretty fast though. I also learned how to deal with homeless people. They weren't as bad as I'd first thought, and they were actually pretty nice to me. They shared their food with me and told me all kinds of tales about themselves. Soon enough, I had some homeless friends who were very good people. On the final day of the dare, I was already excited about going back to normal life. But that day, something weird happened. A man stopped in front of me. He had a briefcase and was dressed in a nice suit. He was eyeing me with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. He asked me if I was homeless, and I said yes. He left to make a call, then came back. He told me that I'd impressed him with my street smarts and standing my ground against that other homeless man on my first day. How did he know all that? If I wanted, he said, I had the opportunity to be on a new reality TV show that was like Big Brother, but with teens. I stared at him blankly. The man explained that this reality show wanted to give back to the community, so they were allowing 2 homeless teens on the show. I fit the picture. I wasn't sure what to say as I wasn't really homeless, and it felt wrong. But I loved reality shows, and this was an amazing opportunity I'd never have otherwise. The man took my silent contemplation to mean yes, and the next thing I knew, I was signing an agreement to be on the show. Before I could admit the truth of my situation, he had got my cell number and was gone. I sat there in shock for a few minutes. Later that day, I went to the soup kitchen, which was packed, and had actually decent soup. Some of the ladies were nice and let me wait in line with them. However, as I was waiting, I soon saw things devolve into chaos. There were too many people who needed food and not enough staff to hand it out. It even seemed like there might not be enough food. Some of the people in line started mobbing and fighting each other to get to the front of the line. I hurried behind the counter and started handing out food alongside the volunteers and yelled at people to calm down. I managed to get everything back to normal, and quickly, everyone was happily getting served. After I went back out on the streets, I saw it was about to get a lot harder as it started to rain. All of the homeless people took cover, but I stayed where I was since I wanted to have the full homeless experience, including the very worst parts. After all, if something like that happened at night or when I was too weak or tired to move, I'd be exposed to the elements. Plus, I needed to think about what I had seen back there in the soup kitchen. It was incredibly moving and heartbreaking. Those poor people, so hungry and miserable that they were driven to get into physical fights for food. I wanted to do something, but I felt so helpless. That evening, when I got home, I didn't feel right. The dare had ended, but I still felt bad about the harsh reality homeless people were forced into. When my mom saw me, she was horrified. She said I'd been acting weird all week and that I looked like I had a terrible cold. When I admitted what I'd done, she was furious with me. Then I remembered the offer I received, but telling her about the reality TV show didn't calm her down. At dinner that night, I was quiet, and when my mom asked me why, I admitted, we always have food, so I always took it for granted. But today, I saw people fight just to get something to eat. My mom felt bad about what I'd seen, but seemed to think that was just the way things were. I wasn't so convinced though. There had to be something I could do. That night in my room, I couldn't sleep or stop my negative thoughts from cycling around my head. Maybe it was because of all the homeless friends I'd made and how frustrating it felt not being able to help them. So, in the middle of the night, I made up my mind. I'd go on the reality show so I could win money to help my friends. When I told my mom, she was supportive, although she was worried. You never know what crazy stunts these reality TV shows will pull. I told her not to worry, that I'd be able to fend for myself. Besides, I had to do this to help my friends. It was lucky that I called the director when I did, because they were just about to start filming the show. As it turned out, my mom was right about the show. For some reason, the director decided to focus on me and encouraged me to be mean to the other contestants. He wanted me to do things like steal their food and even call them names. I guess they wanted to paint me as a villain or something. At first, I went along with it, because if I won, I could help so many of my friends. But the director kept pushing me further and further. And the worst thing was, he'd smile his creepy smile and say, "You know you want to." Ew, no, I didn't. Finally, when we were on the streets filming one day, They got me to pick a fight with a girl who was sleeping under a plaid blanket. I almost said no, but I knew the director would boot me off the show if I argued, so I went for it and shook her awake. When the girl came out, sleepy and disoriented, my jaw dropped. It was one of the friends I'd made while I was living on the streets. "You jerk!" I exploded at the director. "How dare you torment homeless people when you know how vulnerable they are? You're sick!" The crew put down the camera, and my friend hurried away before I could explain myself. Meanwhile, the director's face was beet red, and he said with a sneer, "The award had your name on it, but now you're getting nothing." And that was that. I was booted off the show. At least my conscience was more or less intact. I was livid. The show had been completely corrupt. It made money off homeless people who didn't know any better and were desperate for money. When I called Carol, she agreed that the directors and the crew were complete psychos, but brought up how she had filmed me. That gave me an idea. On the day that the show was to premiere, we decided to take our revenge. Some of my tech-savvy friends helped us post the videos Carol had made of me on social media. Now the whole homeless reality show was ruined, as it was revealed I was never actually homeless. The show was publicly criticized, and the director received threats from angry people, and he tried to sue me for his losses. Luckily, Carol's mom was the top lawyer in town and represented me. The case got a lot of press, and big lawyers got involved. But in the end, I won. All the judge had to see was some footage of the show and how it took advantage of homeless people, and she ruled that the entire show was unethical and misleading. Best of all, though, was what she ruled would happen to their profits. All of it would go to help the homeless. So, in the end, I did receive some criticism for pretending to be homeless. It was a risk posting those videos, but one I definitely didn't regret. The most important thing was that I helped my friends and other homeless people too.